Hi everybody, I'm Jim. Welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to do a book review video. I just finished this book called The Honesty Crisis, Preserving Our Most Treasured Virtue in an Increasingly Dishonest World. It's by Christian Miller, published by Oxford University Press, and it's a brand new book. Came out, I think, this week. I received a hardcover review copy a number of days ago, just a few days ago or last week, and I plowed through this very quickly as expected. I just blitzed through it. And in this book, what is this about? Well, let's read the back cover copy because it does, I think, do a good job of encapsulating what's going on here. Honesty is our most treasured virtue. Research has found that honesty is the single most important characteristic a person can possess when it comes to liking them, respecting them, and understanding them. But honesty is eroding at a frightening rate in many areas of society today, as we are confronted with a number of honesty crises. The frequency of deepfakes has skyrocketed now that they are simple to make and untraceable. In our relationships, with the easy availability of online pornography, anonymous chat rooms, and infidelity websites like Ashley Madison, cheating in a relationship has never been easier. In education, many students are using AI to complete their writing assignments with little chance of detection. In politics, social media helps with the dissemination of fake news, and polarization reduces our tendency to condemn political dishonesty if it aligns with our own views. In public spaces, it is easier to become a celebrity than it has ever been in human history, and yet celebrity encourages greater dishonesty. In religion, religious leaders are increasingly confronted by temptations to plagiarize sermon material from the internet and AI. Christian Miller's The Honesty Crisis diagnoses this problem across a range of social phenomena, drawing on his years of research, and makes the case that the stakes are higher than we realize. Proposing concrete solutions, Miller's urgent and timely book will interest anyone concerned about the moral character of our world and its future. So that's The Honesty Crisis. That's a really good book blurb. Pretty much covers the whole thing. Okay, so that's what it's up to. Who is Christian Miller? He's an ethics professor at Wake Forest University. The question comes up early on in the book, why are we in an honesty crisis? Well, he says, number one, dishonesty is easier to get away with than it ever was before. And number two, dishonesty is more enticing and appealing. The book, by the way, is written for a general audience. It's very, very simple and easy to read. It's sort of more of a conversational style. He's sort of, his first person point of view comes across at he's kind of candid, and it's kind of an open sort of discussion with a back and forth. And that was pretty well done. All right, so then chapter 2, he dives into a lot of social science studies about honesty and dishonesty, a lot of quantitative data like coming from the soft sciences. I will be honest here. Honestly, I am not a huge fan of social science research. These kind of like studies that are based on surveys and different kinds of experiments, controlled experiments and so forth. Okay, it is what it is, but it just doesn't do that. I don't find it like particularly persuasive a lot of the time. I just don't put as much faith into the soft sciences as I do the hard sciences. But he does a good job of reporting this data and kind of laying out, describing what the problems are. And then chapter 3, he gets into the deep fakes issue. After stating the obvious that deep fakes are dishonest, why does that matter? And he dives into that. And he says that dishonesty matters because it creates a whole host of problems. First, it erodes trust in the recordings that we see. We're talking specifically about the deep fakes problem. It erodes our trust in recordings. Case in point, sidebar, is, and he doesn't get into this because the book was written before this happened, but just recently during this Iran war, Israel kind of issued these videos with Netanyahu, President Netanyahu, or Prime Minister Netanyahu, and a lot of people thought they were deep fakes, like that he was in hiding. Like later we find out that he might have been he has prostate cancer, so maybe he was going through some treatments, and maybe they issued these deep fake videos where he's like seen like kind of talking in front of a curtain with Israeli flags, and he's got 6 fingers. Or there was another like coffee shop video where people thought it looked really fake and so forth. So I'm not saying they were deep fakes. I kind of thought they might be, but I'm not an expert in that kind of thing. But anyway, like, why were they doing that? Anyway, it erodes trust in the recordings themselves. And then it manipulates trust in people. That's a problem. It just increases the misinformation problem in our media and society, culture, and it violates the autonomy and dignity of people. So, if you're a celebrity and your face is getting like stamped onto some like porn video, you can see where that leads. And then it's a violation of your rights, like the same other thing, like the people like using your image and your voice without your permission, and you don't sanction it. So it can damage reputations. All right, so that's a fairly nice analysis of like the deep fake issue. I wish he had even amped this up some more, because I really think the deep fake problem points at something that's not just an honesty crisis. It's almost like an epistemological crisis. Like, if we don't know what's true anymore, we are in deep, deep trouble. Like, where things can just be passed off as being true because they look real. Well, and everyone knows that it could be a deep fake, and the deep fakes are only going to get better. We are in some big trouble. And I'm sure there are philosophers writing books about just deep fakes, and those might be worth going to. But at least he's raising the issue here and pointing out the problems associated with it. Chapter 4 is about online infidelity and the honesty crisis in relationships. So here we're talking about cheating on significant others. Examples would be cyber sex, online dating, chat room flirting, sharing nude pictures of yourself, arranging in-person trysts online, like you sort of make all the arrangements. And he adds viewing online pornography as a form of cheating, and even emotional affairs can be a form of cheating. So different ways you can be dishonest in relationships. So obviously the internet is the primo enabler of infidelity. It's more available and easier than ever to cheat in these various ways. And it even gives you new ways to cheat that you couldn't do before. By way of hypothetical scenarios, Miller analyzes why these behaviors are dishonest. And he does this in all these chapters. Like, the book is filled with hypothetical examples, scenarios, like, okay, what if this happened? And then he'll analyze, and then he'll kind of turn it around and look at the other side, and then he'll complicate it and kind of dig a little bit deeper and explain some of the moral dilemmas that are associated with this, as ethics professors are wont to do. This is like standard ethical debate or ethical discussion. And then he provides suggestions for what we can do to resist the temptations to cheat. Things like setting boundaries and managing accountability, increasing awareness. And he does this in every chapter too. So the chapters generally end with, here's what we can do. Here's what we can try to like mitigate these problems. I feel like, as much as he's pointing out that there's a crisis with dishonesty in our culture. I totally agree with him on that. Like, I think I catastrophize even more than he does in this book. I think it's I think it's a real deep existential epistemological problem we have in our hands here that is tearing the fabric of society asunder. Chapter 5 is about educational, academic cheating, something I know quite a lot about because I teach. And the problem of cheating has always been with us, but it is exponentially worse than it ever was before. So he gets into the psychology of why students cheat, and what is plagiarism, how educators combated plagiarism in the old days. And then I like that he pointed out, he had a little section devoted to COVID-19, where it was like, that's when things really changed, when we were all shut down and we had to just all teach online. And this is when you see the cheating really, it was, you couldn't really police it effectively. And then of course he gets into the AI cheating crisis. Like I said, it's exponentially worse now because you can just prompt AI and it will write a paper for you in seconds. You give it the instructions, it spits it out. There's a paper. You can tweak it, you can adjust the style, you can ask it to write it as make it sound like a freshman. It'll do anything you want. The AI is there to serve you. And of course, for those of us who teach writing, here's another existential crisis, right? Because it's getting harder and harder to detect the dishonest passing off of others' work, it's and no one really knows what to do about it. I know some teachers. I was tempted to do this before I took my buyout. I was just going to have them write in blue books. You do essay exams, you write in blue books in the classroom. By hand, old school, pen to paper. That kind of thing can work. Definitely would probably be needed for something like a test, objective test. But others have different solutions. Some kind of just completely cave, they completely accept AI, and they sort of make it part of the process. And then most people probably just muddle along. And then chapter 6 is the fake news chapter, fake news and the honesty crisis in politics. And he states his intention up front in this chapter to focus less on the politicians who, aren't they always dishonest, to the more ordinary citizens like ourselves. So this is very much like end user focused chapter on what do we do with the fake news that we get. Now, this chapter I have to confess, I found it a little exasperating because it's, to some degree, it's obtuse. All these sort of scenarios and these examples he brings up, and then he twists them into odd shapes and turns them around, and kind of like it becomes kind of relativistic and it's sort of like, well, yeah, then you can see it this way and you can see it that way, which, it's valid, like ethical discussions. I'm not saying it isn't valid, but it just had the effect of, I think, letting certain people who are self-deceptive off the hook. In his view, you can be completely wrong about an issue, such as climate change, or the stolen election, or the believers in the flat earth. You could be completely wrong and yet be perfectly honest. If you're sincere in your beliefs, you have a wrong-headed belief that the earth is flat. If you really believe that and you share that belief with others, you're being honest. Well, okay, I take the point. I get it. I get your point. I don't disagree with it. But so what? Like, what's the point of that? This seems to me to be like beside the point almost. Like this is not really quite the problem here. Like the problem is how are you getting that wrong information? And why are you believing it? So anyway, we'll get into this a little bit more. So the problem is someone or something is feeding bad, dishonest information into the public sphere pipeline. And I want to know, who is responsible for that? Who is doing that? Why are they doing it? Why are they doing it? This dishonest information is getting propagated by someone, something, by bots, by algorithms. Like, someone's behind the bots, right? But he doesn't talk about this. He doesn't really talk about it as much as I would want him to talk about it. It's basically crickets. By sort of confining his discussion to what I call the end user point of view, like, would you share info that you knew to be untrue? Like, you get a meme or you get some like fake news story and you're pretty sure it's not factually correct. You might still pass it off for political reasons, or to make a point, score a point, or own the libs, or some kind of like malarkey like that, right? So that's what he's interested in discussing, like sort of why people do that and the problems with it. But he's skirting around the elephant in the room, one of several elephants. The room is crowded with elephants. It's a zoo. And I will point out some of these elephants that, as I see them, that are not really discussed. Who are the major players in society that might be behind this dishonest information that gets passed as fake news? Well, it could be the PR industry, public relations industry. It could be advertisers. There's not one word in this book about advertising anywhere. It could be political action committees. It could be lobbyists or lobbies. It could be the rich and famous. It could be the ruling elites. It could be journalists, the mass media, the CNNs and the Fox Newses and the New York Times and the Breitbarts, and from low to large, low to high, lowbrow to highbrow, like across the journalistic spectrum. NPR, it could be, you name it, you name your media outlet. And there could be disinformation being passed off there. It's, and we're talking here about, quote, experts from these different industries. These are all professions: advertising, public relations, think tanks, political action committees, mass media. These are experts, professionals. They should know better. So if they're passing off what we can broadly recognize as fake news, then they're responsible. They're the dishonest ones. Those are the people who are lying to us and deceiving and manipulating us. And they should know better. And they are not talked about enough in this chapter for my taste. Why Miller doesn't talk about these aspects is mystifying to me. I just don't get it, especially because he's talking about this being a crisis. And I totally agree with him. It is a crisis. These are multiple crises we're facing with dishonesty. He's on to something here, but you're not going all the way down to analyze it. But he does finally get into talking about politicians. I'll just skip to the end of this chapter, page 152. Recent research has found that for many politicians, being caught lying inflicts reputational costs on them in a variety of ways when people are primed to think about honesty. These include how well a politician did in dealing with the situation in question, how honest she is as a person, and how her overall job performance should be reevaluated. There are exceptions, though. For some politicians, people are often entrenched in their evaluation of the politician's overall job performance, regardless of whether they are caught lying or not. Indeed, such politicians can regularly make statements that are of dubious honesty and yet still be regarded as highly authentic by their supporters. They are what the sociologist Oliver Hall and his colleagues call a lying demagogue. A lying demagogue. And then Miller says, I will not name names, but I imagine some will come to mind. Okay, why don't you not name names? Just be honest. We all know who you're talking about here. Make it real. Just come out and say it. Then he says, this is surely paradoxical. And I like the point he's making here, don't get me wrong. This is surely paradoxical. For on the one hand, such a politician can make statements which he knows are made up, and he also knows his audience will know are made up. Yet it is still the case that this person does not seem to take a political hit for his publicly accepted dishonesty. Instead, his supporters rate him high on authenticity. As Hall notes, if a constituency feels its interests are not being served by a political establishment that purports to represent it fairly, a lying demagogue can appear as a distinctively authentic champion of its interests, end quotes. That's a really interesting point. The person who just gets away with lying, like blatant lies, dozens of lies per day, but because they come across as authentic, it's okay, right? This kind of goes all the way back to that original problem I had with if you really believe something and you're honest about your belief, it's okay. Not that he says it's okay, but it's like, it's honest. You honestly believe in something that's not true. Well, what if you know it's not true, but you sort of honestly believe in your own lies? Anyway, this is the kind of situation we find ourselves in 2026. He says, let me finish this. By so blatantly going against establishment norms, including norms of truth-telling, the lying demagogue is clearly willing to run a significant risk for what he believes and to champion the interests of those on the outside of the political establishment, even at the cost of acceptance by that very establishment. So we all know he's talking about Donald Trump here. I don't know why he doesn't just say it. He thereby demonstrates his authenticity. As Hall remarks, this very need by the establishment to distance itself from the lying demagogue lends credibility to his claim to be an authentic champion for those who feel disenfranchised by that establishment, end quote. These are really interesting political points being made that kind of go sort of explain the appeal of someone like Trump and the kind of how the establishment just can't stand them, and then how their opposition to him sort of feeds the very authenticity that these out groups that support the demagogue, it sort of feeds the beast. It feeds their love for their dear leader. Boy, it is messed up. And then we finish the chapter. He says, thankfully, lying demagogues appear to be few in number. Ideally, by punishing most politicians who are found to act dishonestly, citizens can incentivize their leaders to be more honest in the future. One can only hope. One can only hope, and thankfully, they're few in number. Well, what if the few in number is the most powerful person in the world? I think we need more than hope at this point. I think we need to do something about, and I'm not so sure these demagogues are few in number. They may be on the rise. So again, it's kind of dancing around this elephant in the room. I thought there was a real opportunity, like that we brought up something really cool there at the end of like a cool point, and I wanted the author to go a bit deeper into that, because now you're really getting into the crisis. Like, wow, like if this is true, what you're saying, that someone can kind of come across as being super authentic, even though they're a lying demon, we're in big trouble. All right, onward to chapter 7. This is about celebrities, fame, lying, and the honesty crisis for celebrities. Interesting chapter. He sort of launches into a definition of celebrity. He conjectures about the correlation between celebrity and dishonesty. I generally agreed with him on this. Like, there's so many temptations if someone becomes a celebrity to indulge in more dishonest behavior. He analyzes 4 reasons why the greater your celebrity, the greater your susceptibility to being dishonest. And the first is that celebrity is insatiable. It's a drug, and you always need more of it. So you'll go to sometimes dishonest lengths to get your fix. Number 2, celebrity is worth protecting. So if there's something in your past, like a skeleton in your closet, that could tarnish your celebrity, you're going to cover up that truth and be dishonest. Number 3, celebrity erodes moral safeguards. So you're surrounded by yes men, enablers, and so that kind of compromises you. Number 4, celebrity facilitates greater opportunities to be dishonest. So like people flinging themselves at you. So infidelity becomes easier, or you're traveling all over the place, and the temptations abound, and something he doesn't get too much into either, because there's nary a word about like advertising in this book, is sponsorships, things of that nature. You see this with YouTube celebrities a lot. But yeah, we get the point. So what makes celebrity part of our honesty crisis today? Well, he says it's more appealing and easier than ever to become one. And here he does talk a lot about social media influencers, how many folks can, you don't really need a star-making machine anymore to become a celebrity, at least a modest celebrity. And he brings up examples of people who have just millions and millions of followers and views on places like TikTok and Instagram and YouTube, things like that. You know the story. All right, chapter 8. This was an interesting chapter. He finishes with religion. It's about pastors and the honesty crisis in religion. Hypocrite warning when we get into religion. Okay, who knew that sermon plagiarism was a thing? I didn't know. I had no clue. I'm not a churchgoer. I must confess. I must be honest. I didn't realize that pastors are plagiarizing sermons, and apparently it's kind of a big thing. And some pastors get fired for it. Others get away with it. But he analyzes this pretty carefully. I just didn't even know. And then also pastors are cheating on their spouses to an alarming degree. And they are subject to all the temptations of celebrity that were talked about in the previous chapter. And then tacked on to the end of this chapter is like this little appendix about the church sexual abuse scandals. And I found this to be very interesting. And it's around page 206, right here, just a little over a page. And here he brings up the sexual abuse scandals that were part of institutions such as the Southern Baptist Convention and the Roman Catholic Church. which, as he puts it, reportedly took steps to ignore, hide, deny, or minimize what was done by individual pastors and priests. They covered it up, which is dishonest, textbook dishonesty. It should be talked about, and you probably should devote more than a page to it in your chapter on religion. But there was an interesting paragraph I wanted to quote here where he's quoting someone else on this idea of institutional betrayal. Yeah, it's this paragraph right here. So I'm just going to read this for you and see what you think of it. Perhaps the leading approach to better understanding institutional cover-ups, such as what happened with the sexual abuse crisis in the church, is the theory of institutional betrayal developed by psychologist Jennifer Freyd, F-R-E-Y-D. Institutions are concerned to preserve their own reputation and the trust of the public. They also are concerned many times to protect themselves financially and to maintain their authority and power. These motives can foster what Freyd calls betrayal blindness. In the case of a church, for instance, the leaders might engage in willful ignorance concerning the harms that are being perpetrated by abusers in the church. This is a form of dishonesty, akin to self-deception in the individual case, something that he talks about a lot earlier in the book. In some instances, institutions go further and actively engage in acts of intentional deception to try to maintain the standing of the institution. Well-documented cases are familiar in the church context. And then he goes on and talks a little bit more about that. And then later down here, he brings up a question. He does a lot of this in the book. He sort of has like the devil's advocate question, or he imagines what an invested reader would ask. And I was thinking this question too, so I'm glad he posed it. So why then wasn't institutional dishonesty by the church a central topic of this chapter? Yeah, why? Why did you only devote a page in an appendix to the chapter to this very important, in my opinion, topic? I have a reason, he says, but I also acknowledge that whatever I say here can come across as downplaying the severity of what has transpired. Please know that that is not my intention. Thank you. The reason is that I do not know whether the church's institutional dishonesty in recent decades counts, strictly speaking, as an honesty crisis. What? As I have been understanding honesty crises, they have two elements. First, dishonesty becoming easier to get away with than it was before. And two, dishonesty becoming more enticing or appealing to engage in than it was before. Starting with the second condition, is institutional betrayal by the church more enticing today than it was, say, 25 or 50 years ago? I really don't know. It seems to me that there's been a persistent drive to engage in willful ignorance or intentional deception throughout this period. And consider the first condition. Is it easier for a church to get away with institutional dishonesty today than it was in past decades when there was much less awareness of sexual abuse in the church? Maybe I am being overly optimistic here, but I would like to think that with greater awareness, there has also been a greater focus on detection and prevention. Again, being unsure about whether the church's institutional cover-up of sexual abuse is an honesty crisis today can come across as insensitive, maybe a little bit. But none of what I say here is meant to detract in any way from the horrors of the sexual abuse itself, nor from the wrongness of the institutional dishonesty involved in covering it up. It only bears on whether there is currently an honesty crisis going on in this area, as I've defined those terms. We should all hope that the answer is no. So because it doesn't quite fit your mold, they're only going to devote a page to it? I think, I think you need to work on the mold here, because this deserves to be talked about, and I personally think it's a crisis. It's part of the honesty crisis. And this leads me to a broader point. I'm glad he brought up the institutional thing here. Is just, on the whole, the book seems to evade, shy away from, or skirt the institutional component. This kind of goes back to my critique of the fake news and politics chapter, where it's like, what about these institutions, some of whom are, propagating these lies and distortions and misinformation because they have an agenda? There's a political agenda, and you're not even going to bring it up. You're not even going to devote space to it. I think it's sort of an oversight, but that's just, I just wanted to bring that up. Okay, so chapter 9 is the last chapter in the book. It's called If Honesty is Under Attack, Why Bother Trying to Protect It? And here he puts forth a pretty good case for why we should try to protect it. And I think a lot of this chapter, the early part of the chapter, is basically stating the obvious, the obvious reasons why. Who really wants to live in a society that's just fraught with dishonesty? Many of the answers of what we can do to try to protect it, they sound good, but they're either a little idealistic or just, I feel like they're they're sort of obvious, but they're harder to implement. It's always doing it is harder than saying it. But we appreciate the defense of honesty that he's putting forth in this last chapter. So at least he touches on some of the major thinkers in the great books tradition in this chapter as well. That's something I wanted to make a point of. Aristotle's virtue ethics were mentioned, I think, in chapter 1, when he was sort of defining his terms and premises for his arguments. And that was nice to see. So Aristotle was sort of mentioned on a couple pages. And then on page 216 in this final chapter, he brings up Plato. And he brings up the Ring of Gyges, which we've talked about on this channel many moons ago. And that was nice to see. But he doesn't really give a lot of space to these great books thinkers. Not as much as I would have liked. And then on page 224, as we're sort of finishing up, he mentions some of the giants of Western philosophy. Great, cool. People like Augustine, Aquinas, and Immanuel Kant. He name checks them here, but that's all you know about Augustine and Aquinas. It's just he drops the name. He doesn't go into anything that they thought. Immanuel Kant, this is all you get in the entire book about Immanuel Kant. So he's talking about, in this section, about white lies, and are they okay or not? And also, is always being honest going too far? Okay, so he says, let me be fair and just start the section where he mentions all these guys. Short paragraph. Some of the giants of Western philosophy would agree with me that white lies are wrong. But people like Augustine, Aquinas, and Kant went much farther than this. They maintained that all lies are wrong. Here I am afraid I have to join most contemporary philosophers in parting ways with them. Okay, you have a right to do that. Kant himself provided a famous example that actually led many people away from his own conclusion. In Kant's story, a murderer is searching for your friend and asks where your friend is. You know the answer. You know where your friend is. Today, the updated version of Kant's story is the so-called Nazi at the door. Here is my version of the example, and I'll just read the hypothetical for you, and this one's fun to think over and mull over. Would you lie or not? Would you tell the truth? You are hiding a Jewish family in your basement in a Nazi-occupied town during World War II. The Nazis do not suspect you in particular and are doing a routine patrol of the neighborhood trying to find any Jews. At each house, they ask if the owner knows where any Jews are, and if the response is no, then the Nazis move on. You know all this, and here is the knock at your door. It's a single Nazi soldier, and he asks, "Do you know where any Jews are?" What would you do if you were in the position of this homeowner? I strongly suspect you would lie and say that you do not know where any Jews are. That is what the overwhelming majority of my students always say. It is my own position as well. And I suspect many of you would say the same thing. Okay, now, and then he goes on and analyzes this problem. But what he doesn't do, he doesn't mention why these thinkers, Augustine, Aquinas, and Kant, why they said you should never lie, that all lies are wrong. He doesn't give the reasoning. He just says Kant came up with this example, but there's not really, he doesn't present the ideas. And I was a little mystified by why not. I get that you're simplifying things for a general readership, and it's very easy to read a book. But come on, man, a short paragraph about the categorical imperative, I think, belongs in a book like this, especially since you brought up the white lies problem and the Nazi at the door question. This is where you can spend a short paragraph saying, here's what Kant said about the categorical imperative. What if everyone did this? What if everybody lied? And then the consequences of that. And so you should act as if what you do would be sort of universally applied everywhere. It's just not talked about. And that's it for Immanuel Kant. You know what else isn't in here in this book at all? There's no mention at all of utilitarian ethics. It's not nowhere. No J.S. Mill, nobody like that. It's not in the index. It never comes up. So a whole branch of ethical theory is just entirely avoided. In fact, most ethical theory here is skirted. It just doesn't come up. And he at least makes an attempt to explain why he's dodged the ethical theories on page 228. At the bottom of 227, he says, is there any rule we can come up with to help us think about when being dishonest is or is not morally okay? Or do we need a rule? And then he says on 228, this is a huge topic that will take us into the world of ethical theory and the task of devising abstract criteria for when actions are morally right and wrong. I am not going to open that Pandora's box now. I will only offer my own opinion, which is that there is no single rule to be found which tells us all the answers to morality, or even just the answers to when dishonesty is morally okay. Morality is far too complex and nuanced to be distilled down into a single rule. Okay, so looking at the world of ethical theory is a Pandora's box. So he basically says, I'm just not going to open that box. I'm not going to give you ethical theory. I wish he had. I think it could have been done in a very compact, summary way, because you want to point readers, you want to open some doors for readers to say, here's what Kant thought about this. Here's what the utilitarians thought about this. Here's what maybe Levinas in the 20th century said about ethics, and so on. And go back to Aristotle and spend a little more time with him. I just don't understand why he's dodged that. He didn't want to get down into the weeds. I get that. You're trying to keep it simple. It's a short book, trying to keep it readable, but you can make these ideas readable. I'm convinced of that. And it's just a shame because I think it would have helped. I think it would have helped to sort of explore sort of the groundings for some of these scenarios and the way you're kind of like turning these problems around. Like if you use theory to inform some of that, it would help us understand the line of reasoning better. And it just wasn't there. So I think that was a missed opportunity. Okay, so that's more or less like what this is about. It's a nicely footnoted book. It's got a nice bibliography. The bulk of the sources used are social science research. So if you're into that kind of thing, you're going to find a lot to like here. Who is this book for? I think this book is for beginners, people who they know that we might be in an honesty crisis. They're seeing it in different facets of their lives, and they want to know more about it. They want to start thinking about it more rigorously. Well, this is going to start to open that up. It's going to ask some appropriate questions. It's going to get you thinking ethically, thinking about morality, thinking about virtue, thinking about sincerity, and thinking about all the different ways that we can be dishonest. So it certainly opens some doors in that regard. So as a very sort of fundamental, basic beginner text, I think it's useful. And I just before I shot this video, I thought of another, I think, good audience for this book. Because even though I have my disagreements with the book, even though I have my critiques, I'm glad I read it. And it was definitely food for thought. It's definitely a book that got me thinking, that got me riled up a little bit. And that's a good thing. So I think this book would be a really good choice for a book club. Do you have a book club? You're looking for a nonfiction book to discuss about a timely issue. It's very easy to read. No one's going to be sort of put off by it. Boy, there are a lot of conversation starters in this book. You can start digging into all the hypothetical scenarios. You can come up with your own examples of dishonesty that you see in your own consumption of media and your own observations of culture and society. This would be a really good book, I think, for a book club. I really do think it would be very well matched. It's got to be the right kind of book club. But if you have a group that likes to converse about things and they're not afraid of like debatable stuff, I think this would fuel a lot of interesting conversation. And I'm curious to hear from you in the comments if you think that we are in an honesty crisis. Where do you see it manifesting? What are your concerns and fears about it? How bad is it? I actually think it's even worse than he portrays. Like he's a little bit too sunshiny for me. Like I wanted to. I'm catastrophizing in some of these areas, like the deep fakes, especially, and then the fake news politics thing. Yikes. But what do you think about that? Like, where are you seeing honesty in crisis? And then if you have good ideas for what to do about it, I'm not knocking what he suggests here as things to do, but I'm a little skeptical as to how successful he can be, because I feel like there's cracks in the foundation, folks. These dishonesty problems, like these are cracks in the foundation that might require rebuilding the whole house. And, I don't know how you go about doing that. But anyway, those are some of my honest reflections and opinions and impressions of this really interesting book called The Honesty Crisis: Preserving Our Most Treasured Virtue in an Increasingly Dishonest World by Christian B. Miller. Let me know what you think. If you're new to the channel, hope you become a subscriber. Don't forget to hit the like button, notification bell so you don't miss new videos if you do subscribe. And we'll see you again, I hope, real soon.